Hi there, I'm Laura. Welcome to my channel, Aquamarine18. You'll know from the title of this video that I will be sharing an in-depth review of a tarot deck, which is called the Neo Tarot. Here's the box. You can see the subtitle is A Fresh Approach to Self-Care, Healing, and Empowerment. The creator of the Neo Tarot is Jericho Mandiber, and the artist is Diana Ruiz. So, before I get started with this review, I want to talk a little bit about what the review will entail, so that you can, of course, choose to watch the video or not. So, unlike prior videos that I've done on particular decks, this is not a first impressions and unboxing video. This is a detailed review of my thoughts of the deck, having worked with it for over a month, which will include in-depth conversation about the guidebook and the overall presentation of the deck, as well as the cards themselves. So, I'm going to create two playlists on my channel, one for in-depth reviews and one for unboxings and first impressions. So that will be a distinction that I maintain going forward. This video may be longer than some of the others because it is going to go in depth. So additionally, what I'll be doing is time stamping below so that if you want to just skip ahead and get to the thoughts and flip through of the cards and skip the content about the guidebook, for example, you can do that. So I'll try to give a few timestamps there so you can jump ahead as you wish to see the content that you're most interested in. If you notice me throughout this review looking over to one side here, it's because since it is an in-depth detailed review, I have made copious amounts of notes, which I will be referring to a little bit throughout the review. So before I get started on reviewing this deck, I will say I purchased this deck myself. I paid roughly $33 Canadian for it on Amazon, and my thoughts are my own honest reflections on my use of the deck. So before I get into reviewing the deck, why I got it and why I chose to make this deck my first review. In terms of buying this deck, I will say this deck is a Tom Benjamin made me do it. I'm very glad that happened though, and I'm grateful for that. I will link Tom Benjamin's walkthrough of this deck below. I saw it and I thought that the artwork really worked for me. I really liked how the cards looked in his video. And I also noted that in his little grading system that he provides each deck he gives a walkthrough for in the description box of his video, he gave this deck an A in terms of diversity. It might have been one of the only decks that he gave a score that high. And I buy decks with diversity in mind and representation in mind. So seeing a deck get rated that highly by Tom Benjamin, who I know is also someone who thinks about diversity in tarot a lot, that is a mass market deck, I absolutely had to buy it, and I'm so glad I did. I certainly have some criticisms, which I'll share in my review as well, but I have lots of great things to say about this deck. So, first thing that we can talk about in terms of the Neo Tarot is the packaging, which folks may already be aware is a bit odd. So when you buy the Neo Tarot, and I've used it, so mine is not in the condition I bought it. When you buy the Neo Tarot, what you get, and I've also bookmarked the book for the review. When you buy the deck, you open the container like this, and inside, the book is actually glued to the box. So when you buy it, the back is attached like this, and you have to read the book with the box behind it. It then has this cardboard kind of cut out well here on the other side, which the cards come inside there in a tuck box. So the tuck box sits in there and it just pops out like this. And the publisher for this deck is Hardy Grant Books, which I have never seen another deck published by. So I found this packaging to be infuriating. I really wanted to use the book for this deck because it is framed as a kind of self-care tool, and there's self-care activities for each card, which I'll get into later on. And I knew that I would want to read the book, but I don't usually tote around big boxes like this. These in my house live in a cupboard with my decks then in either deck sized like tuck boxes or bags or both. So I knew that this wasn't functional for me, so I went ahead and separated the two. So I would say please do not let the fact that the book is glued in stop you from getting this deck. It's really a very easy thing to deal with. So the book does actually have a back cover that's just the same sturdiness as the front cover. It's just glued onto the box. So I pulled them apart, and once I pulled them apart, I had a book and a box, both in fine shape. They're just messy. Like if you glue together two pieces of cardboard and then you rip them apart, you'll have your two pieces of cardboard, but there's this kind of sticky mess on the back, right? So I used this school glue. It's just water-based washable glue that is very inexpensive. I'm sure there's lots of brands of it that I got at the craft store, and some thick paper that I found in the scrapbooking section that was actually just something I had left over from another project. And I glued a black paper onto the back of the book so that I could keep the navy cover that was there, but I just glued black, and black's just what I had. Frankly, I could have done a lot nicer job on this if I had spent more time, but I wasn't looking for anything beyond function. Similarly, I pasted some black, kind of shiny, and you can kind of see the glue, a little bit there in the bubbles, but I glued this paper on, and it's perfectly functional for me. I'm happy with the way that it turned out. I will say as well, in terms of something that I like about the presentation, there are a few things. I like that the book comes edged in navy, like the box and the cover. I think that that's a nice little touch that makes it look nicer. I also really appreciate that this packaging came with the cards in a tuck box in there. So I've had a couple of other decks, the Numinous Tarot that I just did a walkthrough, for example, where the cards come in this kind of hole, but they are just in a plastic wrap, or there's no tuck box. And I like this a lot better because I can set this big package aside, which is what I've done. And I will do now, setting it aside. Oh, shaking. I can set aside that box and keep them in this tuck box. The tuck box is nothing to write home about. It's just a cardboard box, but this is easier for me and fits better with my method of storing my decks on my tarot shelf. I'll probably make a bag for it as well, a little drawstring bag to keep this in. So this is great, and I'm really glad that they included it. It is a lot more functional for me. So there's the packaging. Now, I want to, after talking about the packaging, get into talking about the book. So here's the book, same size as the box as we've seen. It has, if you count the about the author, about the illustrator, etc. content at the back, 143 pages. So it's it has a good amount of content in it. So I want to, first I guess I'll read the table of contents, and it has a nice table of contents inside. The contents titles are You, in brackets, We Are Here, a Tarot Manifesto, Meet the Cards, the Self-Care Setup, Spreads for Self-Care, the Minor Arcana, and then there's the 4 suits, the Major Arcana, Acknowledgements, and about the author and about the illustrator. So you have quite a bit. It's nice and easy to navigate. So in the You and We Are Here section, the author Jericho Mandiber introduces the project, and I've marked a few pieces that I want to read to give a kind of feel for the kind of personality of the deck and book. So she introduces with this quote, "What do self-care and tarot have in common? Kind of everything. They both require ritual, positive affirmation, and the suspension of disbelief to one degree or another. They both know the importance of mind, body, and spirit. They're both about learning how to live better and take care of ourselves smarter every day." So she sees tarot as a kind of natural fit with self-care practices. And I think a lot of us feel the same and work with tarot in this kind of way in one way or another. She then goes on to locate herself and her upbringing a little bit. And something that I really like that she talks about in this section is a bit of the kind of politics involved in reclaiming tarot as a positive practice. So she writes, "Practices that fall under witchcraft, such as tarot and astrology, have, I believe, been demonized because they're a feminized knowledge system that threatens the rationalist, materialist power structure. And she talks about some of those practices that have been marginalized in that way. And I absolutely think that she is right. So in talking about self-care then, she adds, as for self-care, its growing popularity is both a cause for celebration and maybe slight trepidation too. Trepidation because of the growing threat of co-optation. Celebration because so many human beings struggle and their survival through self-care shows their resistance. Okay? So thinking about self-care as an act of resistance, particularly for marginalized folks, which she talks about, and I think that this is important, and I am glad that she introduced it in the way that she did. She also includes the Tarot Manifesto, as mentioned. So I'll just read the introduction to the Tarot Manifesto and then the main points. I'm not going to read all of it. If you get the deck, you can read all of it. So she writes that Neo, meaning new, tarot, is the name of this book, but it could just as much describe the new empowering tarot movement. When I refer to Neo Tarot throughout the book, this is what I mean. While divination is an intrinsic part of the card's past and future, tarot speaks to a new generation through the language of self-discovery, self-actualization, and yes, self-care. It's about becoming present, uncovering your potential, and getting to know your deepest truths. And a little divination never hurt anyone either, right? So aside from that, what does Neo Tarot look like? And she has these bullet points as part of the manifesto. And she says, tarot is real. Neo Tarot is about forgiving yourself. A Neo Tarot reader understands that objectivity in tarot, as in life, isn't a thing. Understanding that we can say that there is no wrong in Neo Tarot. Neo Tarot leaves the ego behind. Neo Tarot is for everyone. To practice Neo Tarot is to play without shame. Love that. Neo Tarot never tells you what to do and never flatters. Neo Tarot stands against fate, in scare quotes, static prediction, and the idea that, scare quotes again, everything has been written. So I will say one critique that I have of this book is that amidst all of the emphasis on novelty, right? Neo is new. This is a new thing. This is a fresh new take, original. The book, one thing the book doesn't have that I wish it did is a bibliography or any references whatsoever or a recommended reading, something like this. It is very clear to me in reading this book that the author has read plenty about tarot, right? It comes across. When she talks about, for example, the history of tarot and mentions the Visconti Sforza deck and things like this, it's quite clear that the author is coming from a place of having done research, right? Which is a good thing. This is a compliment to the book. But I really wish that the references of where these ideas come from, suggestions of where to follow up in terms of additional reading on tarot, and the kind of learning that actually informed the author writing this book did not get lost. It irks me that the bibliography is not there, because I think it is important to acknowledge the ideas and work and research that others have done that then inform us in the writing that we do, right? So I do really wish that that was there. The other thing I'll mention in terms of the idea of a Neo Tarot, new tarot, the emphasis on kind of modernity, right? Like, this is a modern deck. This is not that old-fashioned stuff. This is a new tarot movement. This is new generation of tarot, and this kind of emphasis, and this is not the only deck that has this, right? There are a number of decks we can think of that mention that they're a modern tarot deck, for example. And this always kind of both excites me and makes me a little bit nervous. The idea of modern tarot excites me in that I think a lot of the time what that looks like can be things like getting rid of rigid gender associations, for example, which I think is really important, and which I do in my reading practice, or getting rid of or reworking traditional imagery of organized religion that might be difficult to work with for some people, right? Which can be a great thing also. This is what excites me about the idea of modern tarot. What makes me nervous when I read something like this, though, is that when something is designed to be of the moment so specifically, right? It's designed to be so contemporary and speak to right now, speak to 2019, the year the deck came out. And this is not just for decks, this is like for television and other things as well. With an emphasis on being so of the moment, there is a potential actually, I think, for that thing, say that deck or that book, to become dated really quickly, right? Something that's really of the moment, something that's really speaks to the current moment, as opposed to something timeless, can get dated very quickly, I think, if it's not done really, really well. And I also think it runs the risk a lot of the time, and there's some of this in this deck for me, in the focus on the moment and on the contemporary and the modern, of being accidentally, I would say, or inadvertently, quite kind of generation or age group specific, right? So not only speaking to a particular time, but also a particular time as a very particular kind of cohort of folks experience it, which isn't always named, but I think can often come across. And so there is a little bit of that here, I would say for sure. But overall, I really like the tone of the guidebook, the content. And I really like the cards, as we'll get to for a second. So continuing on into the guidebook, we have a meet the cards section, which is a kind of brief section of the book that's aimed, I would say, largely at someone completely new to tarot. And I think it's really well done. So it has a very brief history of tarot, which again needs a bibliography. It talks about the structure of the deck, majors and minors, suits. It has some on numerology, on elements, on court cards, which the author speaks to court cards and says traditionally that there are ages, genders, and even physical attributes associated with each court card. You can forget about that. While it might be true that a queen card represents energy typically associated with feminine qualities, that doesn't mean it represents a woman, for example. So this author and this creator does not ascribe those kinds of meanings, but does note them there. So if you're a new reader who is not familiar, you learn that those kind of associations are quite common and there's something you're going to run across. But this author doesn't ascribe to those, though still maintains this distinction between masculine and feminine energy, which can be an issue for lots of folks, myself included, but has degendered the court cards in a particular sort of way, and we can see that when we get to the cards. So I think that this section is really successful. She notes that when she talks about traditional meanings, that she's referring to Rider-Waite-Smith's system specifically. It's set up in such a way that I think for a new reader, it could be a good first resource. I think that this deck could be someone's first tarot deck very effectively. And I think it's one that will appeal to a lot of people. So that's a great thing. And I think it's hard to make a deck that can speak to experienced and very new readers at the same time. And I do think this deck has done that. Continuing on, there's also a section that I mentioned in the book, the next section, which is the self-care setup. And this is a section where the author introduces things like shuffling the cards, how to ask a question, discusses whether or not you want to read reversals, and kind of leaves it up to the practitioner ultimately, but does say a little something about that since there are reversed meanings in the book. And I think that this section too is full of kind of good guideposts for beginners. And I flagged a little quote here, which I wanted to read. And this is where the author talks about asking questions, right? And asking good questions. And she says, if your intention for a reading takes the form of a more specific question, great. Most people think in questions when it comes to tarot, which means knowing what kind of questions to ask. When considering your question, think about how you can elevate it to the most enlightened place, a place deeper than the surface yes or no question will take you. As human beings, accountability and proactivity aren't always our most developed attributes. Instead, we have a proclivity towards an I want this thing now worldview. Neo-Tarot teaches us that far more than being tools for prediction, the cards are our inner echo, rendering visible the invisible forces of our imagination, our ego, our desires, and most of all, our magical potential to heal, create, and manifest. And then she says a little bit about, a very little bit about, some of the ethical issues around reading for others. For example, that you might want to not read about medical issues and so on. So I think that the authorial voice in this book is really strong. You really get a sense of how the author reads cards, how she sees them as useful, and what she sees them as most valuable for in terms of this kind of self-reflective kind of echo or mirror. And yet at the same time, I would say throughout, it's not imposed, right? There's nothing that says you shouldn't read in a predictive way. And she says, at the beginning, a little divination is a great thing. So it's really specific enough that if you're a new reader, I think it would give you enough to feel confident in kind of developing your skills and way of reading. But it's also open-ended enough that it's not kind of very, very harshly prescriptive, right? And I really like that about this book. It's really not kind of doctrinaire saying you need to read it this way because I read it this way. You need to read the court cards this way because I read them this way. You need to ask questions this way. There's none of that, which is, I think, fantastic. And yet it managed to be specific enough to be good for a beginner. So that's great. They also then include some spreads, and they include 1, 3, 6, and 10 card spreads. They include the Celtic Cross. Something that I really like, and I'm just flipping my notes here, something that I really liked about their section on the spreads is that when they're talking about the 3-card spreads, they, instead of just giving kind of 3-card positions, say, well, you can come up with your own 3-card spreads. You could do past, present, future. You could do mind, body, spirit. Think of groups of 3 things and come up with a 3-card spread that works for you. So while in a very beginner-friendly book, there is already this kind of nudge, like make it your own, right? Get creative with the deck. And I think that that's fantastic. In terms of the card meanings, they're sorted into the majors and the minors. So for the major arcana, you get a full page picture, full color of the card, and then you also get a page of these meanings. And for the minor arcana, you get a smaller picture with 1 card on each page. And you actually get about the same amount of information, I would say, for the majors and the minors. The majors, the pictures are just bigger. And for each card, you get a meaning, a reversed meaning, a self-care activity, a note of sign and planetary associations for that card, some themes, which are keywords, ultimately, and an affirmation associated with that card for each one. And I think that this setup is really effective. And you get again, I mentioned in the court cards that they were not gender specific, right? And a lot of the court card descriptions I noticed for the meanings will either relate them to yourself, like this is you being this quality, or they are gender neutralized. So just as an example, to read the Queen of Wands, which is what I've got open, it says, a person or an energy that radiates with the mastery of the power of attraction. The Queen of Wands is sincere and incredibly strong-willed. Your down-to-earth approach, sensual and bold nature, means people are drawn to you like a magnet. The message, recognize your power. You can harness your creative energies into real results right now. Can represent Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius. So they do not include gender specificity, for the court cards, but they do interestingly include zodiac kind of specificity, right? This, member of the Court could represent this astrological sign. So there's a little bit of that. I think that it's helpful in that it doesn't assume you're a pro with astrology, but there's just little notes, like if you wanted to follow up on it, you could, but it's not in any way central to the meanings. It doesn't demand that you go learn astrology to use this book, which I also think is effectively done. The meanings overall, I would say, to a seasoned reader, are not going to feel particularly surprising. I don't think that the interpretations of the cards, if you're familiar with Rider-Waite-Smith or have read books on a Rider-Waite-Smith system, are going to be, particularly outside of the realm of familiarity. They're written nicely, they're good. They're not incredibly different from other meanings you will have come across, I would say. And I will say something that I liked about the deck. It is this kind of positive deck, right? It has affirmations in it and self-care. There's quite a positive tone to the meanings. However, it's not a deck that shies away from talking about pain or difficulty, or that, there's been conversations about kind of nice washing the more difficult cards, which I have lots of thoughts about and don't necessarily think is a bad thing. For some decks to do, it's totally fine. This deck, I would say, is not one of those kind of putting a positive spin, so-called nice wash books at all. It does absolutely acknowledge difficulty, but in doing so, there's really a focus on what you as the individual or the reader or the querent can do about those kind of situations, right? So if you look at something like the Three of Swords, right, which, we've got the swords going into the heart, generally thought of as carrying like a really negative imagery in a Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. But the Three of Swords in this deck comes with the affirmation, my pain is a testament to my resilience. It does come with the themes or keywords of mental anguish, heartbreak, forced growth, and letting go, right? And so there is, this acknowledgement of those kind of traditional meanings, but always a focus on agency, which accords with the manifesto and vision shared in the beginning of the book, with the focus around, self-care and self-actualization and self-reflection, right? A focus on agency and what one can do themselves, which I think is great. Next, the self-care activities. So I mentioned each activity. Each card comes with a self-care activity associated with it. Before I get into this, I'm just going to grab a glass of water. Give me one moment. Okay, sorry about that. I felt like I was getting a little bit hoarse there, so I wanted to have some water there. Getting into the self-care activities, right? Every card has a self-care activity associated with it, and we remember from the box for this deck, the kind of subtitle or motto is a fresh approach to self-care, healing, and empowerment. So self-care is really centered in this deck, which I really like, but again, also had some trepidations about, right? Like most things, I feel like I'm going to have some hesitations and concerns. So I think that self-care speaks to a lot of people. I think it's important. I think it's something that people look to work with tarot to do. And I think tarot lends itself for that. So I think in that sense, the emphasis on self-care is great. What made me a bit, not hesitant to get the deck, but I guess a worry or something in advance, is that I think the idea of being prescriptive about self-care is really difficult and potentially really problematic, right? So there's going to be a self-care activity associated with each card. So there's a certain suggestion then that if you draw that card, this is an activity you can engage in, right? But I think that making a list of self-care activity suggestions for people that you don't know, right? A broad audience who might be buying your deck is a really, really difficult undertaking. And I think that, there's a number of things that can go really wrong with a book like this, right? Because I think when it comes down to self-care, on the one hand, all we can really do is work from our own lived experiences, right? I know what kinds of and approaches to and activities of self-care work for me, and I know which perhaps don't, and that's great. But I think we have to be careful, right? That doesn't mean that I can generalize from my own experience and presume that what works for me works for everyone, right? What works for me self-care wise might really not work for someone else, right? And I think, there's a lot of easy examples one can come up with for something like this, right? I think about, okay, when I come home from a long day of work or something like this, self-care for me might look like going, out to my back deck, putting my feet up and having a ice cold beer. Alcohol as a mode of self-care is not for everyone, right? And there's really clear, issues and pitfalls there. So while I might say that, well, this is something that I enjoy and that I feel good about, once you turn that into something that you're putting out there in the world and, suggesting for other people, you have to be really careful, right? Because you could be suggesting something that is really not a good idea for a lot of people in terms of health. You could be suggesting something that is inaccessible in some kind of way. There's all kinds of ways that just because something might be a self-care activity that's really great for me, it might not work for someone else. So I think there's a lot of potential risks, right? When you make a list of 78 recommendations of self-care activities, it takes to me an incredible amount of mindfulness to strive to come up with things that are going to work for a broad range of people and aren't going to be in some kind of way like exclusionary, I guess, for lack of better language, right? And I think that it's really hard to do it well, which is why I'll say, and I'll link the video for this below, one of my favorite YouTube content creators, Katie Flowers, quite a long time ago, made a video called Self-Care Activities with the Tarot. And that was a video talking about the exercise of sitting down and writing out your own list of self-care activities, one for each card, right? And making your own. And this is something that has really been great for me and something that I've done. And I think it's great because then it's personal, right? My list of 78 self-care activities with the tarot is mine, right? There's 78 things that work for me, as opposed to getting a pre-written list written by someone else of 78 self-care activities, which may or may not work for me, right? So that's kind of my preliminary thoughts on that. So I want to talk a little bit next about, I would say in terms of the self-care activities in this book, I could sort them into a few subcategories, I guess, of types of activities. And I do think it's done quite well overall. I have some criticisms, which I'll mention. So I think a lot of just to give an idea of what you can expect, right? A lot of these self-care activities in the book are, I'll say, like reflection based. So journaling, making a vision board, free writing, listing out, to-do lists or pros and cons or feelings about something. There's a lot of kind of personal reflection type activities in there, goal setting, things like this. There is some mention of service as self-care in Jericho Mandibur's words. So thinking about the relationship between community care and self-care, having an activity be going out into your community and looking at, contributing your services to a charity or nonprofit that resonates with you. I appreciated that inclusion. I think that talking about self-care is all good and all important, but we need to talk about community care. And we need to not be telling folks who need community care to go do self-care, right? Responsibilizing everyone for their own well-being in this individualistic way. So I really appreciate that. Mini rant there. There is some amount of self-care activities in the book that are, I'll say, like ritual, kind of like witchy ritual, like writing something down and then burning it, for example. Creating your own lucky talisman, doing grounding exercises. And these are presented in a really accessible way so that if there's something you're not familiar with, you can absolutely participate, if you so chose, obviously. There are some that focus on what I've called in my notes improving relationships. So these would be things like calling a friend, pushing yourself to open up with someone that you care about, inviting people over for a slumber party, like more kind of social or interpersonal kind of self-care activities. There are some that are kind of skills based. So, try out knitting, try out gardening, take a class that interests you, try baking some cookies, things like this that are kind of skill-based self-care activities, I would say. There are some that are related to physical health. Drink more water is probably in there. But things like track your sleep and ensure you're getting enough sleep. Things like go out and be physically active in a way that works for you. Try breath work, things like this. There are a few that involve purchasing. This was something I was initially apprehensive about too, right? Because this is a really easy way that suggestions get inaccessible. Like, if the suggestions all involve going out and buying a bunch of things, not only do we maybe not want to just be buying a bunch of things or tying our self-care to consumption in that kind of way, but also like we don't all have kind of big bank accounts to be going and spending on things. And the few that were in there that mentioned kind of purchasing something were for the most part really small, like a coloring book, for example, right? Or a day planner for your wall. So like very, very small things that are pretty affordable. And if they were not affordable for a reader, there's something that you could make yourself. The one kind of big purchase item that was mentioned as a self-care activity was acupuncture, but she also provides an alternative of breath work, saying like, if you can afford acupuncture, you might want to try it as an activity. If not, or if it doesn't interest you, here's kind of breath work that focuses on some of the same things. So I thought that was a nice inclusion. I think that overall, the self-care activities, inevitably, there's going to be some of them that don't work for any individual reader, right? And that's going to be different for someone else who buys the deck than there are for me. But overall, I thought that the author did a really good job of being really thoughtful in terms of kind of conceptualizing and curating a list of self-care activities that clearly shows a mindfulness around accessibility, around not suggesting too much spending, around appealing to a lot of people with a lot of different life experiences and that aren't, identity specific and things like this. So I did think that overall it was done quite well. I mean, there is the odd one, I think, painting your nails is a self-care activity. That's not going to be something that's going to be something that every person wants to do, right? That's okay. There's no problem with coming up with an alternative for something like that. There's a whole lot of yoga in the self-care activities. I will say, as a person who does not do yoga in any capacity whatsoever, those are something, for example, that is not going to speak to me as a self-care activity, but they may be great for someone else. So, there were the odd one that I thought was a little bit climate specific. So like walking around outside barefoot and laying down in the sun and going to the water, going to the edge of the water. Like, these are things that maybe, depending on where you live, are not going to be practical or are not going to be possible, at least for the whole year. So that, there are things like that. There are a few that are, involving sexuality in some way. So one of the cards, I'm looking at my list because I wrote down which one. The Queen of Wands involves kind of creating a ritual around masturbation. The Devil the Devil card makes a number of kind of suggestions in the self-care section, but suggests, for example, quote, become more sexually adventurous. The Tower suggests asking a friend to spoon with you. These are the ones that I think might be the most potentially troublesome and like might really not work and might foreseeably not work for a good chunk of the readership. So I mention those specifically for that reason. Part of my goal in kind of giving a detailed review like this is to give you all an idea of whether or not this deck and this book might be for you, if it was one that you were perhaps on the fence about or one that you were considering, right? So those are my kind of, those are the self-care activities that I mentioned that stuck out the most to me in terms of ones that might put someone off. So I mentioned them because now viewers can know that they're there, right? So now, quite far into this video already, I want to get to the cards, which, as I mentioned, come in this tuck box, and I'm going to flick through them. There are other walkthroughs of this deck, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I want to show the cards because, you know, we're buying a deck, we're looking at the cards, right? That's what people are interested in seeing, probably more than my rambling about the guidebook. So the cardstock is weird. I don't love it. The cardstock, you know, it's a funny thing to say, but the way that I can best explain the cardstock of this deck is that it feels like the cards and the tuck box are made out of the same material. These feel like a cereal box to me. They're very cardboardy. They're very papery. I'm keeping my drink of water and its perspiration far away because if these got wet, they would be totaled. And they're also not cut all that well, so it's going to be really hard to show. But when you look at like the corner, it's almost like they're slightly different sizes, or you can see like in the bottom one here, like the corner rounding is not quite consistent. These are, for me, now that I've worked with these decks for a month plus, minor concerns. If this deck came out in a better production, like it came out in a better cardstock, I would buy the deck again. And the cards do shuffle well, right? Like, don't let the idea of them being cardboardy, if that's what's holding you back, I would say, you know, try it. I think it's totally workable. So the cards are Rider-Waite-Smith, and I'll just flick through and say a little here and there. So some of the familiar symbolism is there. For example, in the Magician, we have all of the suits there, the tools. For the High Priestess, we get the duality of colors and the moons. The cards are, the major arcana are not numbered. So if you're somebody who has very strong preferences about the numbering of strength and justice, for example, that is something that is not specified. So you could read them whichever way you prefer. And something about these cards that I have to mention, because after I saw Tom Benjamin's video, I commented on it like, oh my goodness. There is so much in this deck of a diversity of body shapes and body sizes and body types. Focus, camera. It's hard to do them justice. There are a lot of different body shapes in this deck, and I think that that is a, what do I want to call, factor of diversity that so often gets missed. You know, there have been decks come out recently that I really liked the art style of, you know, or liked different things about them, but that were completely and exclusively very thin and or muscular body types, and that has actually stopped me from getting those decks. So this deck has a lot of diversity in that way. I would also say, in terms of diversity, that there's a very wide range of skin tones in this deck, for example. So there's a wide diversity that way. And it feels, in its, say, like ethnic or racial diversity, very effortless and natural. It's just there. It doesn't feel tokenizing to me. It doesn't feel stereotyped to me at all. I appreciate that very much. There are a few cards like these that don't have any human figures in them, unless you count the sun having a humanish face, but most of the cards have people. So that's the major arcana. So you can see, you know, the Rider-Waite-Smith symbolism is there in a lot of cases, but it is a fresh take. And then we get into the minors. The minors, one thing, and this is totally just a personal preference thing, I would prefer if the minors were just numbered with Arabic numerals. They're actually, it's hard to get the text to show up here. The minors are actually numbered in Roman numerals, which is a thing that I more so associate with major arcana. And I kind of wish that they were not Roman numerals. But again, that is such a small, I mean, that's just a kind of personal taste thing. That's not even a criticism at all. Just a preference because I find the numerals easier to read. And I will say as well, in terms of diversity in this deck, that there is a lot in my reading of the cards. There is a lot of gender diversity. There's a lot of diversity, I would say, like gender expression, gender presentation of the figures. Here we get into the courts, the knights. I think the knights are all on horseback, we'll see. So there's a lot of gender diversity, and there's also a lot in this deck of kind of, I would say like almost gender neutrality. A lot of the figures, in my view anyway, particularly combined with the fact that the book doesn't gender the court cards. There are a lot of figures that could be read in a lot of ways. So this Two of Cups, for example, that's often read as a kind of lovers of the minor arcana. I think that you could read this Two of Cups in terms of gender really kind of any kind of way. And I think that that's a really great thing. So there's a lot of openness in this deck. I think that it lends itself to the reader's own interpretations taking the lead as opposed to imposing a reading on you, right? Which I think is fantastic. Six of Cups. This card reminds me, the one deck that this does remind me very slightly of is The Spirit Within Tarot by Stephen Bright, which is another deck that is a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck that I love, where everyone is silhouetted, which is why this card reminded me of it. I really like the colors in this deck. It looks great laid out. If you want to go look, you can see in Tom Benjamin's video, he lays them out, I think, on the table. I'm not going to do that because it's difficult to get them to show. See, again, this 10 of Cups, right? There's no, you know, those could be any two people to me. It's hard to get it to show up well. And I really like that about it. I really like all of the interesting, different, billowy fabrics and outfits that are in this deck. I really like all of the many hairstyles that are in this deck. And I really love the diversity of this deck. And I can't really think of too many other decks that are inclusive of so many different kinds of diversity that are also mass market, that are affordable. $33 Canadian is a really affordable price for a deck. And I think that that is absolutely fantastic. And it feels very deliberate. In the book, the author talks about this deck being for everyone. It is no accident that this deck is diverse in all of the ways that it is, and that it's open and welcoming in all of the ways that it is. And I think that it's done really well. And I will say that I have had really great readings with this deck. I have not been using it in the draw a card for self-care kind of way, mostly because I have my own list of 78 self-care activities that I made that I associated with each of the cards in a tarot deck, following Katie Flower's video example. So I already have my own that works for me. But I have been reading the book, in purposes for this review, have been reading the book when I have drawn cards, and I think it's really good, and it has given me some really good readings, I'll say. And now I've come to the card that, and I shared this on Instagram, where I also am Aquamarine18, when I've done readings for myself and asked kind of about, what I can do for myself today or self-care today, I keep on getting the Six of Swords. And this is kind of funny for me because we just got a canoe. So going canoeing is not necessarily a thing that I would readily associate with, as like a keyword or a meaning for the Six of Swords. But every time this card crops up, I cannot help but see the canoe that we got in this card. And so that's been kind of fun. Like it's shown up so many times that I've actually, I'll take a picture of the card and text it to my partner and say, well, look what showed up again. Off we go canoeing. So it's become a bit of a kind of joke, I guess, in the house, which is kind of fun. But the readings feel really spot on. It's also, I feel like, because of the colors, a deck that I think would go very well with a number of different oracle decks, if you have an oracle deck that you like to pair a tarot with. This deck for me feels very flexible in its voice. It could get along well, if you're a person who personifies your decks, it could get along well with a lot of different other decks. You can imagine the artwork of many different decks looking nice alongside of this one. Now we're into the Pentacles. I haven't been saying too much about individual cards. I know that my resolution here is not the best with the camera autofocus only half the time cooperating, but there are other just flick throughs that you can look up on YouTube if you want to, that go through the full deck in more detail. But gotta show the cards in a deck review, right? And so you can see too, in some of the cards that have, that often the Rider-Waite-Smith, for example, would have explicitly, religious imagery of a church. The Five of Pentacles, it doesn't here. And even with something like the Hierophant, which in older decks is depicted as the Pope, right? We have a kind of the structure of that Hierophant there with the one central figure imparting knowledge to the two others, but there's nothing here in terms of suggesting a particular denomination of religion, for example, right? This is very definitely not at least not explicitly a pope or a priest, but it carries that imagery and meaning of perhaps sharing tradition, imparting knowledge in an organized way or an institutionalized way. So that's another really nice aspect about this deck that could make it a really appealing deck for lots of people. I didn't show the card back. The card back is the same design as what is on the box, which is nice. It's a nice neutral design. It is fully reversible. And again, the book talks about reversals and shares reversed meanings, but it's also kind of, it's up to you if you read reversals or not. So the option is there. So there's really so much about this deck that I think is wonderfully successful. Here's the last few cards. The Queen of Pentacles and the King. So the name, we can see in the courts that the names are retained, right? The Queen and King, but we don't get, so much in the way of like crowns and I guess there's this figure has a staff, but it's not so. And the knights are on horses, but they're not, armored knights. So they're a little bit kind of a mix of the modern and the traditional, which I think is a good note to end on because that is, I think, something that this deck does really well. There's so much great about this deck. I do wish the cardstock was better, but there's so much about this deck and the book that recommends itself, both for someone who, I've been reading for a long time, or for someone who is a complete and total beginner. I really do think that this set is one that could be great for someone who's interested in getting into tarot for the first time, particularly if that person has expressed interest in predominantly reading for themselves or exploring tarot as a tool of reflection or self-care. I think that this deck would be a really kind of welcoming way into that has enough guideposts for someone to kind of feel comfortable who doesn't have a pre-existing knowledge of tarot, but is also very much open enough that it's not rigidly imposing any kind of particular way of doing anything on the reader. So I think that that's great. So that was my review of the Neo Tarot, again, by Deanna Ruiz and Jericho Mandiber. Here's the box. So I hope that this review has been helpful, and that, if you were considering buying this deck or working with this deck, you found this review helpful and informative for you. So do you love this deck? Do you have this deck? Have you worked with it? Let me know in the comments. Feel free to share your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Bye.